Hello! Today we are going to start looking at lesson 13, which is sample to population. In this lesson, we're going to be collecting data from a sample that is collected from a population. So the population would be everyone in the group. So for example, we could be talking about people at Ross and Robinson Middle School. And then maybe our sample, we might pick out a few teachers and a few custodians and a few students and a few administrators. Just pick a little bit of everybody. Okay, so that's how a sample is a part of the population, and if it's a good sample, the sample would represent your entire population. We'll talk more about good or fair samples later on. I think that's tomorrow. So we're going to start here. We're going to learn about summary values for populations and samples, and think about what can be learned about the population by looking at a sample. So, in the first exercise, we are to describe what we would do if we had to collect data to investigate each of the following questions using either a sample statistic or a population characteristic. Enter your reasoning for each case. So if I'm asking everyone or if I'm surveying or testing the entire everybody, that's a population characteristic. But if I'm just testing or asking or surveying a sample that represents the population, then it's called a statistic. So, how might you collect data to answer the question, does the soup taste good? Well, I'm not going to eat the whole pot of soup. That's the population. Instead, to determine if the soup tastes good, I'm going to have a sample. And I think I would just do maybe a spoonful or a bowl. Probably a bowl or a spoon of the soup to see if it tastes good. I'm not going to have the whole pot of soup. That would be the population. So, the next one, how might you collect data to answer the question, how many movies do students in your class see in a month? So, we're talking about people in our class and like our classroom, so about 30 people. I would probably use a population characteristic. And I'm just going to survey everybody, okay? That's reasonable to survey everybody. Here I would use a sample statistic. Okay. How might you collect data to answer this question? What is the median price of a home in our town? Well, it would not be reasonable to go and find the price or the value for every home in Kingsport. So what might be reasonable? Maybe I could look at some of the houses that are for sale and get a different sampling of different neighborhoods, but it's certainly not going to be reasonable to find the price for every home in the city. So this would be better answered with a sample statistic. Okay, so the population, we said here that we would ask all 30 students in the class. And for this sample, maybe we're just going to look at the real estate in each neighborhood. So we're not going to actually look at each property, but we'll look at a little bit in each neighborhood. Now, how might you collect data to answer this question? How many pets do people own in my neighborhood? Well, it's really going to depend how big your neighborhood is. It could be reasonable to ask all the people in your neighborhood. If, there's 10 houses, it might not be safe. I'm not sure. But I think here I would rather use a sample statistic. And I would rather maybe ask, I don't know, every third house. Because if I just do every third house, then every house kind of has an equal opportunity. Whereas if I only ask my neighbors who were out walking their dog, it's probably going to skew my results or make them a little different. Okay, how might you collect data to answer this question? What is the typical number of absences in math classes at your school on a given day? So the population that we're talking about is all the math classes. So a sample could be one class, but really there's not that many math classes. 369. There's roughly, well, there's 10 classes at Robinson that are math classes. So I think it would be fine to just do a population characteristic here. And it's reasonable to just ask each of the math teachers. Okay, population characteristic. All right. Initially, when I did this page, I wrote down what the population and the sample was for each of these. And then I selected which one. This time I've just kind of talked about it, but if you would rather see each of these for every question, you can pause the video here and look at that a little closer. Moving on. So how might you collect data to answer this question? Oh, we're still doing the same thing. Okay, what is the typical lifespan of a particular brand of battery? Okay, so the population would be like, let's say Duracell to make it easier. All the Duracell batteries that exist. Well, that would be too costly to test all of those and also ridiculous. So a sample would be more reasonable here, which would give us a statistic. All right, and it's probably going to be, I don't know, let's test 10 batteries or even 100 or 1,000. Testing 1,000 batteries would be way better and cheaper than testing all of the batteries that Duracell makes at the moment or has in existence. Okay, how might you collect data to answer this question? What percentage of girls and boys in your school have a curfew? So if you did the whole population, that would be, you would have to ask every boy and every girl at the school. That might not be reasonable. At Robinson, we have, over 1,000 kids, so probably not very reasonable. So you could do a sample. You could ask just, let's see, how could we make that reasonable so that we're not favoring anybody? Maybe we would ask 5 people from each class. And then it could be, everybody would have the same opportunity. So when you do a sample, it's called a statistic. I'm not spelling that right. S-T-A-T-I-S-T-I-C. Okay. How might you collect data to answer this question? The most common blood type of all the students in my class. Well, we could either do the whole population and, test everybody in the class, or we could just do a few students in the class. Now, students in your classroom, about 30 people, so that would be reasonable to do the whole population. And I guess we would have to call in a nurse and test all 30 students. And then we would have a population characteristic. Okay, so when you do the whole population, you have a characteristic. When you just do the sample, then you have a statistic. And right here's the definition. Basically what I just said. You should probably pause the video and read that for yourself. That way you have seen it again. Okay. Now, for which of these scenarios in exercise 1 did we describe collecting data from a population and which from a sample? We already put it up there, what we did. Kind of did that, I guess I got a little ahead of myself. Think about collecting data in the scenarios above. Give at least 2 reasons you might want to collect data from a sample rather than the entire population. well, we talked about money with the batteries, the time it would take to, test everybody or everything, and then also the number of people. If there's too many people or too many batteries or whatever, or eating the entire pot of soup, I mean, that's just not reasonable. So that's when you might want to sample, when it's not reasonable, to test or to ask or survey the entire population. So now we're supposed to make up some results that we might get in response to exercise 1 and identify if the results would be based on a population or characteristic. So let's see, did the soup taste good? We're going to say yes, it was good, and that was based on a sample statistic of the spoonful that I tried. Okay, now moving on to the next one. So my classmates may see 7 movies a month. We're making up these, and that is based on the whole population, because I said that I was going to ask everybody in the class. For the median price of the home, I'm going to say $150,000, and that is based on sample statistic, where I went and looked at one home in each neighborhood. How many pets do people in my neighborhood own? 2 each on average, and that is based on a sample, and I think I surveyed every third house. The typical number of absences, 3 absences per day per class, and that is based on the entire population, so it's a characteristic. Typical lifespan of flashlight batteries, I'm going to say 3 years for these Duracell, and that's based on a sample statistic, because I did not test the entire population of every Duracell battery that's ever been made. What percent of girls and of boys in your school have a curfew? We're going to say 10%, and that's going to be a sample. Let's see, did we just ask certain? I don't think we surveyed everybody for G. Let's see. For G, yeah, we're going to do 5 people from each class. Okay, so that was a sample statistic. The most common type of blood, we're going to say that was O positive. Just making these statistics up. And we're going to say 0 positive, O positive. We're going to say that's based on a population, so it's a population characteristic, because we did have the nurse test each of our classmates. All right, moving right along. Now we have to indicate if the following statements are summarizing data collected to answer a statistical question from a population or from a sample. Identify references in the statement as population characteristics or sample statistics. Colors. 54% of the responders to a poll at a university indicate that wealth needed to be distributed more evenly among people. Okay, so 54% of the respondents, okay, this would be like all the people at the university, so they were not all surveyed. It's just the people that responded. So it was a sample statistic. All right. Whoops. Sample statistic. Moving on. The next question, I think I've accidentally opened a window. Let me close that. Okay. Now, are students in the Bayshore School District proficient on the state assessment in math? In 2013, after all the tests taken by the students were evaluated, over 52% of those students were at or above the proficiency of the state assessment. Okay, so this is after they all did it, so it is a population characteristic because everybody did it. Does talking on mobile phones while driving distract people? So people is the population. Research measures the reaction time of 38 study participants as they talked on their phone and found the average level of distraction from their phone was rated 2.25 out of 5. So their population is all the people, but they're only measuring 38 study participants. So that is definitely a sample, a very small sample of all the people. Statistic. Did most people living in New York in 2010 have at least a high school education? Okay, so this applies to people living in New York in 2010. Based on data collected from all New York residents in the census, 84.6% of people living in New York had at least a high school education. So since it was collected from all of the population and the people tested are the same, that makes it a population characteristic. Moving on. Were there more deaths than births in the U.S. between July 2011 and July 2012? Data from a health service agency indicates there were 2% more deaths than births in the U.S. during that time frame. So, a health service agency, they couldn't do that just on a sample because more people might be born in one area than another, or more people might die in one area than another. So, I mean, this has to be everybody. They have to look at data from the entire United States. Which is what a health service agent, this one does. Okay. What is the 5th best-selling book in the United States? Based on the sales of books, so the sales of all the books in the United States, and that's the population, the United States, the 5th best-selling book was Oh, the Places You'll Go by Dr. Seuss. I just pulled this off my shelf. How sweet is that? Okay. Alrighty, and so since that the population matches those who were tested or surveyed, that makes it a population characteristic. Thank you for viewing this video. There will be another video that goes over the problem set. So this census, this is kind of dated. You can look through this if you want to. I'm not going to go over this census information. I'll go over this problem set with you in a separate video, but you need to go ahead and do the problem set. Thank you much.